Hello, this is Dr. Chin, and this is the lecture for Chapter 8, specifically on essay items. So in the previous chapter, we talked about how short answer items are best used when trying to assess the memorization of factual information, so just basic knowledge. In this chapter, we'll talk about essay items because these types of items can actually be useful for assessing other higher order or more complex types of outcomes. This chapter can be broken down into five different parts. So first, we'll talk about what are essay items. We'll try to define them. Um, Specifically, there are two types of essay items. And then we'll talk about how to write essay items. There are four guidelines related to that. And we'll talk about the advantages and disadvantages of essay items. And those are also four each. And then lastly, we'll talk about how to score essay items, some guidelines, recommendations on how to best score them, so you can do it efficiently and to treat all of your test takers as fairly as possible. So let's talk about the first one, which is what are essay items. So essay items are items where the test taker is expected to write a coherent and informative response to a question. These types of questions will enable you to assess how well the test taker um, can organize information and express his or her ideas in writing, so not just basic knowledge. So in other words, these types of items, they tend to tap higher level and more complex skills. That's why most test takers intuitively feel that essay items are harder. Partly because of that, but partly also because they would need to generate the ideas themselves. Um, it's kind of difficult to bluff your way through an essay question. Now, essay questions, as mentioned before, they come in two types. They either come in an open-ended or an unrestricted response type, or a close-ended or restricted response type. Let's talk about the first type, the open-ended response. So open-ended responses typically place no restrictions on the response. Having said that, obviously there are going to be practical limitations. So you don't want to, take more than you don't want to give your test takers say 10 hours to write a 100-word essay. Um, the limits are enough to make it practical, but the limits are not designed to specifically define the scope of the response per se. You're trying to make this as open-ended as possible. So here's an example. Discuss the various theories of human development that has been talked about this semester. Among other things, be sure to compare and contrast the basic assumptions of the theories, the method used to study development, and the criticisms of each. You are free to take as much time as you need and to write as many pages as you would like, and to organize your answer as you see fit. Now, this is a very nice open-ended question where the response is quite clearly unrestricted. Let's take a look at a close-ended version of this question, where the essay items clearly defines the what is expected of the response. So in this version, it says compare and contrast two of the basic theories of human development that have been discussed this semester. Include a brief summary of each theory, the method used to study development, and the criticisms of each perspective. Limit your response to 5 written pages and do not write for longer than 2 hours. So this essay question is restricting not just the number of pages and how long the test taker can take to write the essay, but it's being more specific on what exactly about the basic theories of human development that should be discussed here in this essay. So the first question, which was much less restrictive, gives the test taker a lot more flexibility and allows for a more creative approach. The second question places definite limits on the content as well as the format. Now, neither is better or worse, just different. I personally prefer restricted ones because it helps set the expectations for my students and for me. Having said that, there might be a teacher in a different field that might prefer maybe more flexibility, maybe a class on creative writing per se, just because the definition of a class in creative writing would mean that it would be kind of hard for you to restrict the types of responses that you would expect to see because you're trying to assess creativity. All right, so now that we talked about the two types of essay questions or essay items, let's talk about how to write essay items. And there are four guidelines specifically. and you want to study this definitely for the exam as well. Number one is you want to allow adequate time to answer the question. Number two is you want to be sure that the question is complete and clear. Number three, you want to make sure that essay questions should be used only to evaluate higher order outcomes, or save your essay questions for these types of outcomes. Number four, have all test takers answer the same question. Let's talk about the first one a little bit more. Allow adequate time to answer the question. So regardless of whether an essay question is closed or open-ended, you probably want to tell your test taker how much time he or she has to take to complete the question, if at all possible. One strategy is to encourage your test takers to plan their response by spending about 30 to 40% of the time outlining or sketching the response, 40 to 50% writing the response, and 10 to 30% rereading or checking and making changes to their essay once they're done. So give your test takers adequate time, and you could tell them as well, like how much time do they have, and provide some recommendations in there to help them pace themselves. The second recommendation, and this may sound simple, but sometimes essay questions are not very clear in their presentation. So let's take a look at the first example at the very top. It says, discuss the impact of the Civil War on the economy of the post-war South. Now, this is no doubt a very interesting topic, but due to the general nature of this question, you could easily write a 7-volume book about this. And so you want to try to make it as clear as possible. Specificity will be a best friend in regards to this, which is again why I prefer restricted ones for the most part. Second one says, discuss the impact of the Civil War on the economy of the post-war, taking into account the following factors: reduction in the workforce, international considerations, and the changing role of agriculture. The second example provides additional direction, which may be exactly what your test taker needs to answer the question more completely. And it will save you a lot of time and effort as well in trying to grade the response, because it's a lot more specific. The third recommendation is you want to reserve your essay questions for higher order types of outcomes, such as comparisons, evaluations, analyses, interpretations. Here are some kinds of words that are typically used to signal higher order types of thinking. So anytime you see words such as integrate, or persuade, or compare, or synthesize, or evaluate, these should be keywords that should tell your test taker that you're wanting them to connect or to draw the dots or the lines between the information that they've learned from class so far. So definitely you want to be familiar with these words over here as you study for the exam, because who knows, maybe it might ask you which of these words are typically used to signal the need for a higher order thinking. Fourth, you want to have all of your test takers answer the same question, ideally. This does reduce the burden placed on you as a test developer and makes the test easier to score. Why easier to score? Well, because essay questions generally have one correct answer, and there should be a model answer or some type of grading rubric that you can use against which you can compare the test taker's response. If you had multiple questions, you need to have multiple standards against which to compare them, which would be additional work for you. So you kind of have to decide what is the cost-benefit ratio in regards to having multiple questions versus having all test takers answer the same question. So ultimately, it's going to be up to your preference, but these are just some recommendations to make your life easier and not make you go insane. All right, so again, here are the 4 guidelines for you to consider. Allow adequate time to answer the question. You could even go ahead and tell the test takers how much time they have and how much time they should spend doing different parts of the essay questions or different stages of the essay writing. Be sure that the question is complete and clear. Specificity will be useful in regards to this. Essay questions should be used only to evaluate higher order types of outcomes. If you're evaluating something that is just assessing basic knowledge content, and then you could use short answer and completion stuff for that. Save the higher order ones for essay questions, and then have all test takers answer the same question. This is more so to help make your life not too difficult when you're trying to make the model response, a grading rubric, and when you're actually grading them. All right, zooming out again, we talked about what are essay items. There are two types, and we talked about the four guidelines regarding how to write essay items. Let's discuss the advantages of essay items. So why are they good? There are four reasons to believe that essay items are good. So these are the advantages of essay items. And you want to pay attention to these ones as well because I believe your second quarterly assignment requires you to talk about the pros and cons of using essay items over short answer and completion stuff. So let's talk about the first advantage. First, you get to find out not only what your test takers know, but also how they relate ideas to one another. So, essay questions most definitely tap into how well your test takers are able to not just remember, but to organize and integrate information in a coherent way. This also gives them the opportunity to demonstrate some creativity when connecting the dots on these bits of information. In general, people who think well, or people who have studied well, tend to write well as well, and the reverse is also true. So for the most part, this works out pretty okay. Another advantage is that essay questions increase the security of exams. I mentioned before that it's quite difficult for you to plagiarize during an essay item examination, especially if you're taking it in class. And so, and in addition to that, it's almost impossible for test takers to effectively guess the correct answer. So guessing is pretty much removed as a legitimate concern. So they do increase test security. Number three, they are fairly flexible, so you can pretty much create an essay item for almost any subject covering various levels of depth. And that's the advantage of essay items over short answer questions. Um, covering different levels of depth in terms of their comprehension and understanding of the course content. Um, if you take the time to create a really good question, you can create one that is maybe at least somewhat exciting to consider and gives a test taker a fair chance at success. Last but not least, your essay questions. They're also relatively, in general, easy to construct. As long as you know your material well, you could put together 4 essay questions in less than an hour that can tap, higher order learning outcomes. This sounds a lot more better compared to, say, trying to create 100 multiple choice items at 10 minutes each, which your textbook author did the math, adds up to about 15 hours. So it's the you do they are easier to construct in the sense that it takes less time for you to construct them, assuming you do know your material well. All right, disadvantages of essay items. So why are they not so good? Well, like I said before, in general, even though most people who think well write well, and vice versa, there may be a minority of students who may know the ideas and their relationships to one another, but may just have some difficulty expressing it in words. Take for example someone who may be learning English as a second language. For these test takers, evaluating them fairly and accurately is always going to be a challenge, and so that's just something to keep in mind. Now, assuming you do know the material well, I said before the essay questions are generally easy to write, but sometimes you may come across a particular topic of content that you may need to invest more time in creating an essay question that makes sure it taps the objectives that you're trying to test and does so in a way that encourages the expression of ideas that you cannot find in like a short answer or completion question. So in general, pretty easy to write, but if you don't know your material well, this can be pretty tough as well because you may come up with a dud if you don't really know your material well and don't really know what exactly you're trying to assess here. Number three, precision in sampling counts. Now, because essay questions can take a good deal of time to create, if you don't really know don't really know your material or what you're trying to assess over here, um, it can take even more time for you to make those items. And I guess maybe what I'm trying to say is that there's only so many essay questions that you can have your test takers take. Um, and chances are your essay question is not going to be able to adequately sample the entire universe of what you're wanting to assess in terms of what your test takers know. You may be able to go into some depth, I mean, the PTH. Um, but as opposed to, having, say, a bunch of multiple choice questions or short answer questions, um, it'd be a little bit harder to comprehensively measure everything, every single thing that you're wanting to measure. So this is just another consideration in the overall evaluation of, you know, how much they know and how much they understand about the topic. Last but not least, essay questions are not the easiest to score. So if you had, say, a class of 25 students and each of them completed 5 essay questions, that's more than 120 questions that you have to carefully read and grade. So there's obviously no machine scoring over here, and it takes a greater deal of time and effort for you to score them. So that's just something for you to keep in mind if you're having to write these essay questions. Don't burn yourself out. Um, you want to design these questions in such a way whereby it does justice to measuring the higher order outcomes, but also it doesn't wear you out as well as the teacher or test developer or as the person responsible for scoring the essay items. So talking about scoring essay items, let's talk about some guidelines to consider. And there are 5 guidelines. Number 1, scorers should have plenty of time to score each item. Sorry, scorers. That's what I meant. Let me correct that right now. Scorers. That means you should provide plenty of time for yourself to score each item. Number 2, you want to pace yourself as you're grading across papers. I'll talk a little bit about why in just a little bit. You want to use a model correct answer as a basis for comparison or some type of objective basis of comparison. You want to score each question across all test takers. I'll talk a little bit about that. And then it might be useful for you to grade your responses without knowing the identity of the test taker. And so let's talk a little bit about each. First one, gotta change that again. Scorers. All right. So you want to provide plenty of time for you to score each item because each of the items has to be read and then scored. And often the scorer, you will read the item more than once. Typically the first time is to get a general overview of the paper. And the second time is for a more detailed analysis, including the assessment of the content, writing skills, and other potential aspects of the essay that may be relevant to the grade. Nowadays, especially with the advent of more and more online classes, such as classes like this one, because essays are increasingly written on word processes. They are more vulnerable to plagiarism as opposed to writing an essay question in class. Your textbook does recommend using some websites that provide free plagiarism checkers, but I do want to caution you about some of these free, quote unquote, free websites. Because some of these websites, what I've heard is that they may sell some of your information that you plug into their plagiarism checker. So in general, I would not recommend these free ones. The best ones are probably still going to be the ones that you had to pay for because they don't sell your information. Plus, I don't know if it's ethical for you to sell information, your students' essays, when they're not exactly yours. So that's just something to keep in mind. But anyways, that's aside. It's just important for you to know too. Plagiarism checkers are very useful. I've used them in different sections of my class. And what it does, just as how your chapter talks about, it does give you a very detailed analysis of the proportion of the sentences that could possibly be plagiarized. Obviously, you're going to get some false positives, but sometimes it's pretty obvious that someone did copy a certain block or section from a different website, and then you need to have the come to Jesus talk essentially with them. So anyway, so that's a really long aside. The point of this slide over here is to say that you want to give yourself time to score each item because you want to do justice to the amount of effort that your test takers put into answering your question. Related to the first point it is critical to pace yourself across students because you want to give yourself plenty of time to score each essay items. You also want to pace yourself if you're scoring a bunch of papers from different students. So if you have 50 students, for example, each writing 4 essay responses, it's going to be quite impossible for you to grade all those 200 responses in one sitting. Fatigue is probably the largest threat to the integrity of the assessment process. So grade your exams in batches, pace yourself, reward yourself, and try to keep this in mind that you're not exactly a machine, or you're definitely not a machine scorer. All right. Third is use a model. Use a model correct answer as a basis for comparison. This increases the likelihood that you will evaluate each answer fairly. Um, One of the best ways to do this is, when you write your essay question, answer your own question. I mean, it's not really fun, but this is one method that you can use to avoid a totally subjective approach to scoring. Another method, which is what I typically use, is I use a grading rubric to guide the scoring process, and I provide the same grading rubric to my students as well. That way, we both know exactly what is expected, um, and that helps both sides meet expectations. So a grading rubric, for example, could outline, criteria such as thesis and organization, content knowledge, or writing style and mechanics. If you look at the grading rubrics that I have for the quarterly assignments, it loosely covers those domains over there. So since I'm talking about this, again, I would recommend that you refer to the grading rubric when you answer your question to make sure that you are hitting the high points of what is required in that grading rubric. All right. Next is you want to, and this is a recommendation. You don't have to do this, but it does have its benefits to doing this. So assuming that you do have a model answer or a grading rubric, you could go through each test, focusing on the same question each time. So for example, you could score this answer to question 1 across all test takers. And then once you're done, go back and score question 2 across all test takers. This allows you to make some fairly easy judgments or comparisons with the model answer, but also make relative judgments within any one item. Here's another tip as well. You could also try grading your responses without knowing that your test taker's identity. So this helps to remove one another subjective element that can enter into the grading of essay questions. Because sometimes not knowing who the test taker is can help you be more objective. There are a few ways to do this. You could use code numbers keyed to names rather than names. I don't know if Moodle actually has the ability to do this, and so if there's a way, I might consider doing this in the near future. But this is not a bad recommendation to consider as well. So there you have it. These are some of the guidelines that could help you score your essays not just more fairly but also more efficiently. So you want to provide plenty of time to score each item. Correcting that typo again. You want to pace yourself across the papers. Use a model, correct answer, or grading rubric. Score each question across all test takers, and grade your responses with some degree of anonymity. And here again, so zooming out again, we talked about the 2 types of essay questions, how to write essay items, the advantages and disadvantages of the essay items, and how to score them. That's pretty much it for this chapter. Fairly straightforward. I hope this has been informative. This lecture has been informative for you, as well as reading this chapter. Read them, study them for the exam. Let me know if you have questions, and have fun with this.